As time went on, the business got far too big for the house in Old Burlington Street, which had seemed such a courageous venture when we took it, and I set about finding more suitable premises. It was not easy, and I grew quite discouraged in the quest. Then, one day, I was sent by an agent to Sir George Dashwood's house at 17 Hanover Square, and immediately fell in love with it. It was a glorious old house, with wonderfully carved chimney pieces and Angelica Kaufmann ceilings, whose beauty would, I felt, be an unfailing source of inspiration to me. Although the rent was considerably more than I had intended to pay, I signed the lease there and then, and in little over a week we were installed. In that lovely setting, I was able to express myself as I had never done before, and my clothes became the talk of London. I rarely came now into the showrooms myself, for I had an excellent staff of saleswomen to deal with clients. I had my own room set apart from the others, and here I would shut myself up for hours with yards of material, out of which I would create tea gowns and ball dresses, dainty little frocks for debutantes, and sophisticated models that looked the last word in wickedness. Sometimes I would find the mood come on me when I would turn out 2 or 3 dresses in a day. At others, inspiration would come slowly, and I would pass the whole day making one dress, shut away by myself, with a girl stationed at the door to keep out intruders, for I had a hatred of the least interruption while I worked. At these moments I was an artist, nothing more. As the sculptor sees his dreams translated into line, and the painter sees his in terms of colour, so mine were expressed in the drapery of a wisp of chiffon or the fall of a satin fold. It is a lesser form of art, I know, but to me it meant a great deal, my life's work, and I was tremendously in earnest over every dress I created. It would be at about this time, I think, that I first met Margot Asquith. She walked into the shop one morning and asked for me. "I hear that you design the most beautiful dresses in London," she began, with her characteristic frankness. "Personally, I hate English clothes, so I get nearly everything I wear from Paris. But I would like to have one dress from you. And if I like it, I will get some more." Probably if anyone else had spoken so bluntly, I should have been offended. But there was something so disarming in her candour, and her smile was so charming, that I succumbed to it at once. I was interested, too, at the prospect of creating clothes for this vivid, restless creature, and I realised that she could wear dresses which not one woman in 1,000 could carry off. I made her a tea gown. It was the first of many, for she was delighted with it. She used to come to the showroom and sit and talk to me. Margot Asquith was one of the very few people whom I liked to have by me when I was working. She stimulated me with extraordinary vitality, although she had exactly the reverse effect on many of her acquaintances. It is impossible to be unconscious of her magnetism. Either one is recharged by it or exhausted. She was exceedingly kind to me, and sent all her friends to have their dresses designed by me. By this time, although the business was growing by leaps and bounds, I was beginning to feel the lack of ready capital behind me, for I often had to lay out hundreds of pounds in materials, and there was an enormous wage bill to meet each week. I was very young to bear the responsibility of it all, and I used to lie awake at night worrying over the difficulties of making my clients pay their bills. The worst of it was that at least 2/3 of them were my own personal friends, which made it impossible to press for payment. They were all rich women, and they could never have realised the amount of worry their bills caused me. This is one of the most serious handicaps which dressmakers have to face, for it seems to be an established fact that the richer people are, the more difficult it is to make them pay their bills. At one time, I was nearly ruined by the amount of money outstanding, and I dared not press for it, lest I should lose my clients. I remember one dire afternoon in the early days in Hanover Square. It was the day on which I had to pay all the work people, and I had not a penny in the bank. I went into my room and faced the prospect of bankruptcy and the end of my dreams with all the courage I could summon up. There was nothing else to be done. It was a very black moment, and I suppose my face must have reflected something of what I was feeling when I went out into the showroom again. I was just going to summon up the saleswomen and tell them what had happened, when the door opened and Lord de L.W. walked in. "You look very unhappy, madame. What is the matter?" he asked me. There seemed to be no use in hiding what everyone would have to know the next day, and I told him, "How much do you want? I can easily lend you £1,000. And he went to my bank and signed for an overdraft, which was paid back within a week, and from that day the Maison Lucile was saved. Such a lack never occurred again. But it had given me a dreadful jar, and a little while later I turned the business into a company and took in Sir Cosmo Duff-Gordon, who by that time was becoming a very dear friend, and Mr. Miles of the firm of Jocelyn, Miles and Blow. It was a great relief to me, for it left me free to leave the business side of it, which had always been a worry and responsibility to me, and concentrate on designing models. With the capital they brought in, we were able to make several improvements, and new fitting rooms were added. In connection with these, I remember that one of them was the source of much amusement to the girls. They discovered that there was a hole at one corner of the staircase, which was just covered with paper. By lifting this, they were able to see into the fitting room without being observed themselves. One client, a famous actress, used to meet one of her admirers regularly there, unaware that the love scene between them was being watched by curious eyes. One day, hearing the sound of suppressed laughter on the stairs, I went to investigate and found 6 girls gathered round the peephole. I was very angry and had the wall plastered up at once. Much as I loved the house at 17 Hanover Square, we did not stay very long there. Everything was going smoothly, and we were making record profits, when suddenly Sir George Dashwood decided to return to the house himself, and gave us notice to leave in a few weeks. We were in a very difficult position, for it was practically impossible to find suitable premises at such short notice. And worst of all, it was just before the courts, and we were in the throes of making presentation dresses. The move could not have come at a more unfortunate time. After desperate efforts, we managed to get a roof over our heads at 14 George Street, but we were dreadfully cramped there, and could not hope to do even half the business we had done at the Hanover Square house. There was no place to show the models, and very few fitting rooms, but the house was the best we could find, and very regretfully we moved in there. It did us a great deal of harm, for our enemies immediately spread the story that we were going bankrupt and had had to give up the house in Hanover Square because we could no longer pay the rent. We lost ever so many of our regular clients through these reports, and because they did not care for the inconvenience of the smaller house. I have always been grateful to Margot Asquith for the loyalty she showed me at this bad time. She not only continued coming to me herself, but persuaded all her personal friends to refute the gossip that was going the rounds about our failure, and secured me many new orders. In the end, after a great deal of trouble, we found the house that was exactly right for us. In Hanover Square again, only at number 23 this time. It was even more suited to us than 17 had been, for there were more rooms, and the big ballroom was ideal for the main showroom. We had to wait for nearly 2 years while the other tenant's lease expired, but it was worth it. In the meantime, I turned over another page in my life. In 1900, I was married to Sir Cosmo Duff-Gordon. During the years in which I was so busy making myself independent and taking care of my little daughter, I managed to find the time for many love affairs. Some of them are very sweet to remember now. A French writer once said that the follies of our youth are the fires which warm our old age. And it is true, I think. I am grateful now for those years in which I lived my life to its fullest extent. But all my loves led up to my marriage with Cosmo, the great love of my life. In those days, it was almost impossible for a woman, young, good-looking and free, to lack suitors. So I hope I shall not be accused of vanity in saying that I had many proposals. It was very much easier for a young woman to get love from men then than it seems to be now. For the attitude to love of the present generation is so different from that of mine. When I was a young woman, marriage meant something more than it does today. And though there were exceptions, like my own first marriage, the majority of marriages were happy. Women were far more necessary to men in those days than they are now, and so men tried to hold them and set themselves to please them. They kept romance alive in 100 little ways, sent flowers and presents, waited on them, and were made miserable by the least snub. I am not only writing now of my own experiences, but during my career as a dressmaker, I saw the progress of hundreds of the love affairs of other women. I saw girls who were not particularly beautiful, and had only the charm of youth and health and vitality, married and loved devotedly by men who had everything to offer. And I saw the women who were rigidly cold-shouldered by their own sex as not quite nice, making fortunes as the wages of sin. Those were the days of the great courtesans, for whom men ruined themselves. The days when a lover would come into the showroom and order 1,000 guinea sable coat as a peace offering after a slight quarrel. One thing I do sincerely envy is the freedom of the modern girl. For I was one of the generation who fought so hard to get it for her. I shall never forget the wall of prejudice which I had to storm. To begin with, I was one of the first women, if not actually the very first of my class, to go into the business world, and I lost caste terribly in doing it at the start of my venture. Old family friends came and solemnly warned me and my mother of the utter impossibility of my going into trade. The very word was spoken with bated breath, as though it was only one shade better than going in for crime. I was told that nobody would know me if I kept a shop. It would be bad enough for a man, but for a woman it would mean social ruin. However, I ran the gauntlet of their pained surprise, as I had to make a future for my beautiful Esme, now the wife of Lord Halsbury, and when they had recovered from the first shock of my obstinacy, they came round to my point of view. For you can always win over your opponents, provided you are sure enough of your own ground. And I was perfectly sure of mine. Gradually, the new venture, which had been regarded by so many of my mother's friends as a lamentable eccentricity on my part, came to be accepted as an established fact. And the women whom I had fitted in my workrooms in the morning were eager to have me as a guest at dinner in their homes at night. But I always refused these invitations, because if I accepted, my clients expected 5% off their bills. But I could never be presented at court, because I was in trade, even after I married Cosmo. Not that I ever wanted to be, for I have a horror of formalities, and have always been rather a bohemian, shunning social obligations rather than seeking them. But he would have liked me to go to court with him, and so I was sorry. Which brings me back again to my second marriage. I had met Sir Cosmo Duff-Gordon very soon after divorcing my first husband, and he fell in love with me from the first moment he saw me. But at that time I had no intention of marrying again, much as I liked him. And apart from that, there was another obstacle to any engagement between us, in the person of his mother, who was an ardent follower of the High Church party, and looked upon divorce as anathema. No son of hers, she said, should ever marry a woman who had divorced her husband, no matter how much she had been wronged. I knew how devoted Cosmo was to his mother, and made up my mind that I would never be the cause of a quarrel between them, especially as she was very delicate, and it was known that a shock might prove fatal. So I turned a deaf ear to his proposals, and put all thoughts of marriage to him out of my head. In the early spring of 1900, I was very run down, for I had been working for years without a holiday, and in the end I grew really ill, so that my doctor ordered me complete rest for 3 months. I went with my mother to Monte Carlo, where I had a glorious time basking in the sunshine of the Mediterranean. After a few weeks, I was so much better that I ceased living the life of an invalid, and began to go out and enjoy myself at the casino and at the fêtes which were given at the palace by the Prince of Monaco, a jolly old man with the bluff manners of a country farmer and a passion for deep-sea fishing. At one of these, I renewed the acquaintance which had begun in London with Lord C. In the ensuing weeks he fell very much in love with me, and several times asked me to marry him. In the end I said yes, though I stipulated that I did not want our engagement to be announced until after our return to London. But we had calculated without the gossips. Of course the news leaked out. By this time the season was ending at Monte Carlo, and my mother and a girlfriend and I went on to Venice. Lord C. followed us there. A few days afterwards, I received a telegram from Sir Cosmo Duff-Gordon saying, "If you are going to marry anyone, it is going to be me." I had scarcely got over the surprise of it when Cosmo himself arrived at the hotel. His mother had died, and he was determined that no one else should stand in the way of our marriage. When I saw him, I realised that I had never really wanted to marry anybody but Cosmo. But I was rather distressed at the thought of explaining it all to Lord C. However, I was saved the trouble, for he and Cosmo met in the lounge, and after a dreadful quarrel, challenged one another to a duel. In the end, my mother made them both see reason, especially as I, not being able to think of any other tactics, went to bed and said I was very ill with the worry of it all. Lord C. left the hotel, but he never spoke to Cosmo after that, although they often met when we returned to London. So, on May the 24th, I became Lady Duff-Gordon. We were married in Venice from the house of Mr. and Mrs. Eden, friends of Cosmo's, and the wedding took place at the British Consul's, and afterwards we went to a large reception in their dream garden on an island near Venice. I shall always remember the beauty of it and the scent of the roses. But it was funny that I, who had created so many lovely wedding dresses for other brides, should have chosen to be married myself in quite an old frock. I was so happy, and I wanted to forget all about clothes and anything that reminded me of the business for the time. We spent our honeymoon in Abrizia and bathed all day long. I was very fond of swimming, and I think that Cosmo was quite surprised that I, whom he had imagined so typically feminine and clothes-loving, had brought only 2 dresses with me, and one of them was a bathing dress. I could beat him at swimming and diving too, to his great astonishment. Those days at Abrizia were some of the happiest in my life, for we were both very much in love, and the place was the most perfect background for a honeymoon. We both hated coming back to London, but I did not want to give up my business career, and I could not leave it for very long. There was also the move to 23 Hanover Square to be considered, and I knew that I should have to be back for this, as it would entail endless planning before it could be ready for us.